what's up guys, this is Lewis here, aka DreadWolf94 for PokerVIP.com, and today I'm coming at you with a hand history review for the $150 to $3,000 prop bet challenge I'm doing. Been playing 25NL recently, so I've been pretty interested actually. It's a really weird kind of level there. People are getting pretty good at the game. The regs are starting to think a lot instead of just mindlessly playing a very standard game. And so it makes for some interesting spots. I think definitely you want to be trying to play the most exploitative game you can because people aren't adjusting very much. The really good regs are, but they make up a very small percentage of it, and your average reg is just going to keep folding in spots where he sees the potential for marginal decisions. And so you can definitely put a lot of pressure on them by doing that. On top of that, 25NL still has a lot of recreational players, and there's good value to be made by just solidly value betting your hands. So yeah, I'm enjoying it right now. It's an interesting experience. So these are some of the hands that I played there recently, and we're gonna have a look at them. It should be interesting. So let's start with that. So it folds around to us with 10-9 off on the button. So the first decision we have here is, should we raise this to steal? I'm pretty much always going to raise this hand on the button, and with the opposition to my left, this is the player we end up involved in this hand, and he is folding pretty frequently to button steals, 65% approximately. This guy is a huge reg. I've played loads of hands with him, not just in this challenge, but previously when I used to play 25NL. So we do in fact open, and we choose to min open. I think that's fine. You can 3x open as standard, you can 2.5x, you can min open. I mixed them up quite a bit. We get called, and another call from the big blind. So flop comes 9 deuce 5 rainbow, and he goes check check. And this is obviously just a pretty standard c-bet. We want to get value from 8 7 6s, ace 5 hands, king 5 hands. Most of the king 5 suited hands these guys will have. So yeah, we're definitely going to bet here. We make it 2/3. It's reasonably standard as well. And we get one call from this player and another fold. So when he calls this hand, there's some things we can immediately understand about his range here. So to call pre-flop, he has maybe 15% of hands in his range, maybe somewhere between 15-20% of hands. And then when he's sandwiched between this guy, this tells us a lot of information about this call. It means that he's probably not floating with a random overcard hand. Like, he's not got a hand like King Jack. He probably doesn't even have a hand like Ace Queen, Ace Jack, those kind of hands. He 3-bet Ace King pre-flop. He might even 3-bet Ace Queen. That's pretty variable. He changed his mind on that. So we don't know if he has Ace Queen. He isn't going to have a hand like Ace Jack. He shouldn't have a hand like King 10. All those Broadway hands should not be in his range to make this call with, because this guy's to his left. If it was just heads up, he could definitely just float this with those hands. But with this guy in the pot, he would fold those hands because he'll end up sandwiched. So once he makes this call, we can make some reasonable assumptions. He has a hand with a 9 in it. That's one assumption. He has a hand like pocket 8s, pocket 7s, pocket 5s, 4s, 3s, deuces, so he can have sets, he can have paired hands. I don't see him making this call with ace high very often, so I think we're fine on that front as well. There are some better 10 hands he can have. No, it's not, sorry. There's better 9 hands he can have. He can have Jack 9 probably sometimes. He can have Queen 9 occasionally. Could have ace 9 and king 9. So, turn card is a queen. And he checks it to us again. So now, should we bet this turn again? I think definitely yes. Why do we make that decision? Well, the queen doesn't change that much. The only hand in his range that the queen really hits is queen 9. Because we're blocking the board with a 9, there's only 2 more 9s left in the deck, and there's a queen on the board, so the chances of him having queen 9 obviously decrease. So yeah, we should be betting this for value against hands like 8 7 6s 5s, no, 8 7 6s 4s and 3s. So we do bet this turn. I think the sizing is fine. More than that, I don't think we're getting calls on these hands, so I think the sizing is good. And he opts to raise, which is pretty weird when you think about it. The only hand he's representing here is Queen 9. Now, you might think that he's representing slow-played sets, but I don't think he's going to do this very frequently with slow-played sets, if I'm honest with you. Because I've made this sizing so that it looks like I'm value betting, like with a one pair hand. So if he has a set like deuces or 5s, for example, which I'm not really going to give him credit for 9s, obviously, because we're holding a blocker. So if he has deuces and fives and he raises this size, he knows he's going to get folds from almost every hand that I'm value betting twice on this board, unless I have queen nine. That's pretty much the only chance he has. So when he makes this raise, it pretty much doesn't represent anything to me. Queen nine is probably the only hand he could make this raise with to protect his hand a bit. But even then, I'm not sure that this is the sizing he makes it. The sizing is really big. Like if he has a set, I expect him to make it like 450 maybe, instead of 575. So yeah, I don't really think that this makes much sense. Certainly, we can look at this in the sense that he could have picked up some flush draws on the turn if he has hands like 8-7 suited that he's not folding because he's got gut shots. So I think a call is definitely good here. And in the river is a 3 of hearts. This card shouldn't really change anything at all. And he does opt to bet the river for a little over half pot. So now we're put in kind of a difficult situation, but I think following the line we took on the turn, it just makes sense that we have to call this. The only queen 9 I think he has in his range is queen 9 suited, which further lowers the chances that he has queen 9. I mean, there's less combinations as a result. So, and the fact we hold a 9 again, it just makes me think he doesn't have queen 9 very frequently here. So obviously sometimes we're wrong, he will show up with that hand, but the majority of the time I think this is a hand he's turned into a bluff. In a weird way, maybe a pair he's turned into a bluff seems the most likely situation, or basically a hand like 8-7 of clubs. He could potentially be bluffing the turn with a gut shot as well, it's possible. So I think once we call the turn and this is the river card, we kind of have to call the river. He doesn't bet the river that frequently, about a quarter of the time. So it's a little bit worrying to call this when he bets it, but to be honest, once he raises the turn, I don't expect him to give up on the river. I do expect him to bet at least half the pot, so I think it's a pretty mandatory call. So we do a call, and sure enough, he's rivered a set of threes, which is weird, but it is gratifying because that demonstrates that a line of thought here was correct, and that he was just pure bluffing this to the river with a hand hand he was planning on turning into a bluff, I'm assuming, once I called the turn. I don't think he's just giving up if he misses this 3. So yeah, an interesting spot, certainly. Let's take a look at the next hand. What am I doing? So this time we have ace 10 offsuit in the small blind, and the action goes 3x open from under the gun, 1 fold, call from the cutoff, a fold here. So our first decision is whether or not to call this hand. This is not a mandatory call by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it's okay, to be honest with you. The hand's going to play reasonably well post flop, and I'm getting pretty good odds for the call. So flop comes 10-3-5 with 2 spades. Checking is pretty standard, just checking to the original raiser here. Checks it back. So when he does this with his under the gun range, he's either planning to check raise this player, or he's basically giving up on this hand. He can have hands like ace king, but yeah, so basically he's pretty much given up on this hand once he checks this here. And this player chooses to bet 119 into 250. That's a pretty small bet. There's no way we're folding, obviously. We have to consider what the weak bet sort of symbolizes here. Most of the time it's going to be hands like 9s, 8s, 7s, 6s, which is a lot of this guy's range to call the under the gun raise. So to be honest, that's what I put him on right now, is like 9s, 8s, 7s, 6s here. And with that in mind, I think raising is probably better. Do I raise? Yeah, I raise. So why is this better than just calling here? Calling means I don't get any more value from those, well, any more value than he's going to bet over 2 more streets. Like, the chances are there will be scary cards on the turn and river. So raising now means that if he has a hand with a 10 in it, all of which I beat because of my kicker, he's going to still call. He's never folding a 10 to a raise here, so he's definitely going to call, especially with these flush draws on board. So this raise gets value from all his 10 hands. It also means that he's going to be more liable to put me on hands that can have bluffs in my range, like flush draws. We're already starting to narrow our range in his eyes, which is quite effective on a board texture like this, because we can be pure bluffing, we can have a flush draw, or we could have a set, we could also have top pair. And he chooses to call, which right now I'm thinking is quite a good thing. turn card is a 7. And this connects with some of the hands he will call there. I kind of expect him to fold most of his pairs to a raise here. Probably 6s, maybe not 7s and 8s. He shouldn't really be folding 6s, but I think he might. So we could argue that 6s, 7s, 8s, and 9s are all still in his range here. He might fold them, it's tough to say. But definitely, I think a turn value bet is right. Still, he can have some 10 hands in his range. I think if he has a set on this turn, he will raise it most of the time, especially since a 7 comes, it brings more draws. So yeah, I think if he has a set, he's going to raise this. And if he has any other hand that has equity, he's going to call. There might be some occasions where he jams a flush draw, but I think he probably has a little bit too much left to do that. I don't think he's aggressive enough. So it should be alright from that front. And we get another call. So once he calls us again, it puts us in a weird situation. So either he now has a hand with a 10 in it that he's not going to raise, which seems the most likely scenario right now. He can still have a hand like pocket 9s, pocket 8s, pocket 7s, pocket 6s. There's maybe some hands with 5s in them, 6-5, stuff like that, that improve a little bit there because they have gut shot equity. Yeah, so that seems reasonable. He could have all those hands in his range now. And certainly the line we're taking makes it look like we could be bluffing with overcards here. We could have overcard equity, we could have king queen and make that raise to just try and make him fold and then barrel the turn. So on this river, what should we do? Should we bet for value here, or should we check and call if he bets? If we check and call, there is no guarantee that he'll bet this river with hands like 9s or weaker 10 hands. There's also a chance that he still only has one pair hands, like 7-6 or 5-6 and stuff like that. It's pretty close between value betting and check calling, but the thing is, I don't expect him to value bet any hand with a 10 in it now. And the fact that we can be repping a missed flush draw here and just pure overcard hands that are bluffing means that I think it's close, but I think this is definitely a good value bet. And if we are going to value bet, we may as well make it all, because the sizing doesn't really change it here if he's going to call or not. So I do expect this to be a profitable value bet. And sure enough, he does call off, and he has 5-4, which is a pretty heroic call. I understand why he calls, because once I polarize my range on the end by betting the pot, I aren't really going to have a hand. I'm either going to have a hand that crushes 5-4, or I'm going to be bluffing, and so I'm going to have missed. It's pretty dangerous to make that call though, because with a hand like, say I just raised this with, like, say I was here with 8-6 of spades or something, and I raised this flop, but the time the 8 and the 7 come out, that hits a bit of my range to be doing this, and so making a hero call for a pot bet on the river is like, I'd say it's probably erring on the side of being unprofitable. But yeah, another interesting hand. We'll go for this hand here with King Jack now. This one was, let's see if I can remember what happens here. I can't remember. So it folds under the gun, and we get a limp from this player who is playing pretty badly. His VP is 38 and he's calling 41% of preflop raises. So that's interesting. Definitely we should be isolating here. It's quite a big isolation. I don't really want any of these players to be involved. He's a fish and I definitely want to play him heads up. So hopefully that happens, and it folds around. And I'm assuming he calls. Yep. So 996 is the flop, and he chooses to check to me. I don't mind a bet here, but it wouldn't really accomplish much, so I think checking is the better option. You could do either, but I still think checking is better because he won't fold anything to a bet on a board like that. So we check, and it comes 3 of spades. And then he chooses to bet the turn. So he can have 6s in his hand, he can have 9s, but most of the time, literally just because of the frequency, he's going to limp call pre-flop, he's going to have nothing, and King High is going to be the best hand. There are some aces in his range, but the thing is, if I call on and he bets the river, he never has an ace in his hand because he'd just check. So we should call once and then fold, and then we're actually behind if he checks the river. If he bets the river, I think we're probably ahead depending on the river card. The river card is a deuce, which is pretty much a great river card. It's possible he can have hands like pocket fives and stuff. I still think he checks them on the river, and he probably puts in a small value bet. But the sizing here will be pretty important in telling us whether we can call or not, because I'm actually more inclined to call a large sizing. So 250, I mean it's pretty close, but he is betting the river about half the time, and so realistically he's just going to show up with air more often than he isn't. So yeah, I think it's a call just on the basis of the fact that this guy's range is super wide and he's going to rep it all the time here. And he's just never going to have it. Well, he is going to have it very occasionally, but not often enough to merit folding king high. He just doesn't do this with ace high on the end. He'd check. Can value bet 8s and 7s, but I'm not giving him enough credit for those hands. So yeah, I think we should always be calling here. Not always, most of the time against this player we should be calling here. So we do call, and he turns up with 10-7 of hearts. So he had a gut shot draw, and he bluffed it over 2 streets, which is an interesting one. Yeah, I don't mind the play, but just because the hands I played with this player, I know he's going to turn up with air there most of the time. So it's pretty player dependent read there. And now we're going to look at this last hand. And this is going to take a long time, because this hand was super complicated. Like, yeah, ridiculously complicated. So, prepare yourself for a long haul of analysis. 2 folds, and an open from the cutoff, a call from the button, another fold, and we complete that. So ace 3-5 here, pretty standard check, and a bet from this player. So this is immediately gets complicated. This, I know this guy really well, we played a lot of hands together. Pretty rarely will I ever fold this flop when he c-bets this board, because he's doing it pretty much all the time. But for those of you who don't know him, we're going to explain why exactly this isn't a fold. So, actually I'll show you what I do here first. We raise, so it's somewhat controversial, right? So why am I raising this flop? I mean, to understand that, we have to first understand this guy's cutoff opening range. So here it's showing pre-flop opening of 17%, but if I look at his cutoff opening range, he's opening 27%, right? So we're going to whip out Poker Stove, because, you know, we all love a bit of Poker Stove. Don't we? Surely. And we're going to go for 27. So this is 27% range, pretty much these as well. Whatever, it's pretty much that. So obviously I expect him to c-bet pretty much his whole range here. The hands I don't expect him to c-bet probably gives up with like 9-8 suited, 10-9 suited, Jack-10 suited. Probably c-bets everything else. Probably not 4s and deuces. Anything else I don't expect him to give up here? Maybe some king eggs hands, maybe these hands he won't c-bet, he'll check. Alright, so that's interesting. His value range here to bet includes like 8-8 to king-king, and I pretty much expect him to c-bet all Broadway hands that miss. Checking gives up the initiative and puts him in a sandwich situation, and he knows he's almost always going to lose the hand if he does that, so he will c-bet pretty much all of his range there. Clearly, raising such a dry board texture from my perspective is like really polarized. Like villain is always going to put me on at weakest ace jack and strongest like pocket fives in terms of made hands, or he's going to put me on a total bluff. Like there's no in between ground. That's what I mean by polarized. If villain has ace king, I'm not bluffing. He can only beat like 2 hands in my value range, which is ace jack and ace queen, and he splits with ace king. But he knows I 3-bet ace king, so he knows I don't have that. Importantly though, once we think about villain's cutoff range, it's pretty obvious that raising is better than calling. Because he's raising 27% from the cutoff, and I expect him to c-bet like everything but the hands that I've taken out here. He has a c-bet stat of 62%, but because of this particular board, I actually expect him to be c-betting about 90%. We've only taken away like 3 or 4% of hands from the 27% sample, and 3 or 4% out of 27 is like 11-ish percent, roughly 10%, some 10 or 11%, I'm not sure. So that means that we subtract 10% from 100 and we get 90%. So he's actually on this board. He's actually going to c-bet 90% of the time. Of course, our only option isn't to just raise. We could like float here, but I think floating is bad due to stack sizes mostly. Obviously we'll end up out of position as well, and then we assume the biggest part of my range to call here are like middle pairs and weak XX suit type hands, along with like a few pure floats with ace high, or like on ace high boards like that. Obviously with the kind of hand that I was to just call here. We'd add another 130 to this, and then I am going to have to put in a raise at some point to win this hand unless he checks down and king high happens to be the best hand. Because he can have some stronger king hands in his range, that's not going to end very well for me very often, and I don't really expect him to just give up. I think even if I call here, he's going to bet the turn or the river. If he doesn't, he might even 3-barrel. It's difficult to say. So I prefer raising. I think raising is good primarily because just because this player folds pretty often to flop raises. From my stats, he's folding about 45% to a flop raise, and if we then consider his range again, because he's c-betting 90%, he is just going to take the standard line and give up with almost all of his range. We're going to poker stove it again. So he's not going to give up. The only hands I actually believe he'll call when I raise, I think he folds all his pairs. I think he only calls with an ace in his hand now. So that takes out all of his hands, but probably about 10%, I would imagine. Something like that. So 10.4%. So these ace-x hands make up 10% of his range, and these are the only hands he'll call. So when I raise, he's going to fold pretty much 2/3 of his range. And of course, sorry, 5s and 3s as well. He's not going to fold those, obviously, because they make sets. I don't expect him to ever outlevel me and like re-raise over the top of this, because he will just never take that line. It's too out of the box for him. So I don't expect to get leveled here, really. So yeah, I think just on the basis of the fact that he's going to fold more than 50% of the time here, he's going to fold about 66% of the time to this raise. It's profitable just on that basis alone. I don't really need to consider anything else, and that's before we even think about whether we can make him fold the turn in the river with more bets. So yeah, I like it from that point of view. I think the raise is definitely superior to the call. So we shall see the turn card after all that decision. He does choose to call, so now I put him on an ace. He has an ace, he has 3s, or he has 5s. How strong his ace is, though, there are more weak aces that he will fold than strong aces that he will continue to call with, because he has all the suited aces and all the aces down to ace 7. So turns a jack, and this gives us a gut shot draw, which is not that important, but it's at least some equity. So we have to decide now if we're going to bet this turn card. And this decision to me came down to stack sizes here. The important thing here is that me checking is not necessarily weak, because he knows that I know that he has an ace now. So he knows that if, right, it gets really weird here because this is a really strange metagame sort of situation. If I bet the pot, I commit too much of my stack here, because then he's only going to play really strong aces, and if he re-raises me, I can't do anything. I can't call with king high because I know he has an ace. I know he has an ace now, but I don't know how strong his ace is. If I check, I can look like I'm having the intention of check raising him because I just made ace jack on this turn card, or I have a hand like ace 3 or ace 5 which already has 2 pair. So betting here is not good due to stack sizes, but checking looks like I could be going for a check raise, and does not necessarily portray my hand as being weak. And he knows that he can't bet an ace because I'll only keep playing. He'll either be raised or I'll fold, so he can't get any more value. So this should almost always go check check unless he has ace jack. If he has ace jack, he'll bet the turn because he knows he'll get calls from ace king and ace queen, but he doesn't think I have ace king, so he'll get calls from ace queen. So I checked him, and he offs a check. So now we pretty much know he doesn't have a 2-pair hand. he definitely bets 5s and 3s on the turn, so he doesn't have a set. So he has a hand between ace-7 and ace-king that is an ace-jack. And the river card is a 3. So now my decision, I can't make him fold any hand by half pot betting. I probably can't make him fold any hand by betting 3/4 of the pot. What I probably should have done here was put him in a really difficult spot and shoved. I probably should have overbet twice the pot. But that's not what I did. I probably should have done, because that puts the maximum pressure on him to fold here, and it looks like what I would do with ace-jack. But instead I decided to polarize my range and bet almost the pot. Now it looks like I tried to check raise him, and my line looks like I tried to check raise him, and then I didn't get value there, so I'm pawing the river, because I know he knows that I know that he has an ace. Yeah, so it gets into a really high level metagame against this player. But it was interesting. And unfortunately, he actually snapped me off with ace queen. I don't really expect him to fold ace queen there. I think he has to consider folding it, but he's not going to. I think if he has ace 10, he gets put in a really difficult spot there. It so happens he had pretty much the top of his range, which is a shame. I mean, ace king is the only hand stronger in his range that he shows up with there. So he has the second strongest hand in his range, and I don't think I'm getting to fold that very often. But it's just what happens. Sometimes he's going to show up with the top of his range there. But yeah, that was really interesting hands. I enjoyed playing that with him. So yeah, thanks for watching this review, guys. Really appreciate it. If you have any questions about any of the hands, or any comments on anything you've seen, how would you play the hands? I'd love to hear them. It would be great. Yeah, leave any comments, and thanks for watching. I'll see you later, guys.